Call the meeting back to order after a delicious lunch. And we're going back to 4.2.4, 2022-2024 operating budget direction on page 96 of the package. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Council. Brian from Administration presenting the operating budget direction. So it starts on page 96 of your agenda package. So at the previous Committee of the Whole meeting, which was held on November 9th, we had brought back the operating budget and we had discussed various scenarios for tax increases, keeping taxes the same. And Council had requested that Administration bring back options for a multitude of scenarios for Council's consideration. Also at the Committee of the Whole, Administration did ask Council for any other questions they did have about the budgets to be submitted in writing, and that Administration would write back, answer those questions in writing and put them into the Council package. So there were some questions in that in the operating budget, so we did put the answers in this Council package as well, along with the questions. So we kind of broke them out into two sections, one operating and one capital. For this, all the answers that Administration have are in red, so please review those carefully. If there is any uncertainty also, please let us know, or any further questions on this. So our Finance Department ended up working out a few different scenarios for Council's consideration. So one that was very, very important for Council was to understand what that scenario would look like if we had a 0% taxes stayed the exact same from 2021 to 2022. So that's scenario one. I added in another interesting scenario that I felt was really relevant for Council. So what I ended up doing was I had a 0% tax increase. However, we're breaking out the RCMP requisition. So that RCMP requisition, we'd estimate around $450,000 in 2022. So what that would do is it would keep the municipal tax rate the same, the municipal mill rate the same, sorry, and then we just break out a separate mill rate on our tax rate bylaw for that RCMP requisition. With whatever scenario that we go forward with, we feel that we should be doing that practice anyways moving forward. If Council does choose scenario one, that's great too. We'll just have to move down our own mill rates and just subtract out the RCMP requisition from that. Scenario 3 to 5 is a 1% tax increase, 2 and 3. So the impact scenario is kind of just on the dark blue line. So scenario 1 is a 0. It could go up or down with other provincial requisitions. Those numbers will be finalized in April at the final budget. So I have in the request for a decision on in here what that 450,000 increase would be. So it would be approximately 1.58% tax increase for all classes, and that's just something to consider anyways. The final determination will happen at the final operating budget when that when the operating budget is passed. So this is almost kind of in principle. That's kind of what Council may agree to. Obviously, my recommendation is not what Council decides to do. And one interesting thing I thought I would bring back to Council's attention as well. So at the Committee of the Whole meeting, there were some comments about where does the county sit financially compared to our rest of our peers in the province. So we worked together with our Finance Department to kind of come up with our financial situation and just kind of some scenarios and ratios that we thought would best reflect the total financial position of the county. So one that we came up with is a very common ratio used as the current ratio. So what it is total assets divided by liabilities. So our current ratio is 8.66, which is good. We'd rank around 17th in the province out of 62, so kind of in that top 25%. Our tax collectibility, and this is using numbers, as of December 31st, 2020. So this next one is very, very important to note. So the tax collectibility, this is the only one where we fell below the 50th percentile. And the reason for that is that we had one large tax account that did not pay their tax bill as of December 31st. However, the good news on that is that they did enter into a tax agreement and they're paying their payments over 18 months, and they have so far made 11 out of 11 payments. So this number will definitely fall lower for us for as of December 31st, 2021. And then to note as well is that there's that new bill potentially being passed, Bill 77, which will give municipalities more power to collect future unpaid tax bills. For cash, I think this is a very, very important one, just to kind of understand our liquidity for us for spending. So we rank 7th out of 62, so very high. And then kind of accumulated surplus, which kind of another just general overall picture, we're 14th out of 62. So what that 62 numbers is everyone that had reported their financial results to municipal affairs. One report that is required for us to submit to the province is something called an MFIR. I think it stands for Municipal Financial Information Return. It takes information from our audited financial statement, we put it in, our auditors approve it, we send it to the province, and then it really gives us a good baseline to compare us versus other places in the province. So ultimately, with my kind of spiel, is that overall the county is sitting in a very healthy financial situation. No matter what scenario council chooses to pick, if it's scenario 1 through 5 or another scenario of council's choosing, we should be okay. And ultimately, the reason I personally like scenario 2 is that it does show that we are being financially responsible with our municipal tax dollars that come in. Right now, with the RCMP requisition kind of being lumped into our municipal taxation, it goes up, but our services and our expenditures stay the same. This is something kind of outside of our control. We will ultimately break it out in the future just to kind of show that our mill rate may go down based on this. That's okay. Ultimately, it's going to be the bottom line for your constituents that are going to be impacted by any kind of tax decision that you guys choose to make. And then, yeah, I think that covers everything I was kind of looking to say. And just for those new councillors, so I believe we kind of chatted about this in orientation. So there's 2 separate documents that need to be approved, the operating budget and the capital budget. We still have some review to do on the capital budget, which is great. We'll do that it's after the in-camera session just for timeliness. Ultimately, administration's goal is to bring this back at the last council meeting in December for approval. And ultimately, we're kind of just looking for direction from council today so we can bring the document back for you guys for approval. If there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question. When you say like scenario 2, will it show on a tax statement? Lease requisition, that.
I would have to double check. I can get that answer for you. There's very specific things that can be included on a tax notice. It's within sections 300 of the MGA. I'm not sure if that one we can break out on a tax notice, but I will find out.
That would be a really good scenario if that was the case.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I see on village funding to be determined by council, budget placeholder of an amount of $250,000. I'm thinking that's our old crisp money, kinda replacement. Quick calculation. The last year we had it, which was last year, we paid out $550,000 to the 3 villages, Gleason, Carsland, and Drumheller. 553,000, thereabout. So 250,000 is a 50% reduction. I'm going to have a hard time explaining that when we increase Strathmore's. I know the 700,000 or the 400,000 isn't double the increase because it doesn't take into account the 100 and some thousand we paid for the rec center, right? We could subtract that money from the 400,000, then we can take that increase from the 200,000 that we were giving them, and that would be a fairer number for sure.
I have a question to Glenn, if I could.
Go ahead.
The 583,000 is to villages, or they mean the hamlets?
And the hamlet of Carsland looks like 134,000 and Gleason 125,000.
Yeah, those are our hamlets, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
that come out of that fund, that CRISP fund. So are we going to fund them hamlets differently than the villages, or what's the
We
plan?
should. My opinion is we should, actually.
Yeah, so to answer, I think this could answer both questions at once. So, administration or council approved a policy. It's in our recreation policy somewhere. And it breaks up the allocations that we're funding to the hamlets of Gleason and Carsland. So it's around 200,000. So out of the 700,000 that we were funding Strathmore, the hamlets and the villages, and the town of Drumheller. So Drumheller, well, let me get back to that first one. The community fund one, that is in our budget. So that's under our recreation operating line. So that one will remain, and it's kind of just a monetary amount set by council. Ultimately, we're still trying to work through the numbers for the villages as well. So that $250,000 placeholder, that's still to be determined. That could go up or down. We could always approve it at the final budget. Right now, we're still kind of working on data to get a reasonable number for council's consideration to actually fund the villages. It's kind of just a placeholder at this point. So the town of Strathmore, we did include the 400,000 that we are doing that cost recreation sharing with, included right now is the town of Strathmore, that 400,000 recreation, the two hamlets that we have, Carsland and Gleason, that we do provide community funding to those ag societies and the community halls. And then, so realistically outstanding at this point are the villages and Drumheller. Drumheller, we did do some other financial contributions to them for that Bridge 11 project. And also another thing to note too, if council is considering to doing 2021 funding, that's great too. Council can also, a scenario that we did that for was the town of Strathmore when they exited our CRISP funding. We actually provided 2 years of funding at once in one fiscal year. So it's always an option to do now at a later date. We're kind of just putting it in as a placeholder because we think there will be an amount at some point in 2022.
Excellent. I just didn't want it to be construed as a permanent type number.
No, and we would say that's a complete placeholder at this point. It's just an undeterminable amount. We think it will be something, we just don't know what it is.
Yeah, because the precedent's already been more or less set, right? Okay,
I'm just,
forward to that.
sorry.
No, that's good.
Some of the community halls that have run into financial problems, we're gonna have to figure out a way to make them whole or propose a plan to get them on the road to make them whole because of this COVID thing. So where does that fit into the
So realistically in the operational budget right now, an avenue that a community hall could have is under CRISP right now. CRISP is no longer a fund under the community fund enhancement. So there's two. It's CURB, and then there's also that other one for the community enhancement program. I'll have to take a look at that policy. Matt can probably pull it up as we're kind of chatting here. However, if council does want to do something additional for the community halls, which is a great thing because they are a great piece of infrastructure for communities to meet and activities, engagement, all that kind of stuff, that's something that we can work on and bring forward at the operating budget, the final approval in April. So even though it may not be included in the interim budget, that's great. It can always be passed by council resolution or at the final operating budget.
One thing I've always struggled with in our own residents versus other municipalities that have their separate governance. I'm just wondering with new council stuff, we should work on this, maybe a committee a whole or something where we talk about what direction staff needs to see, because it's always a struggle. And the villages are autonomous to us, like they're their own government. They can have their own tax rate. If they want to do more, they can increase taxes. Whereas our residents in the hamlets are our residents, and we collect taxes from them and should go back to them as much as possible. I think, but it's just a balance that we got to figure out. And if we want to, as a council as a whole, to provide more funding, or us, or that, I think we need to set that direction for staff so it's not this back and forth.
Also, just one thing to note as well is that we do have a section. We are going to be discussing the village funding models today under the in-camera section. It's on the agenda.
Okay. Well, maybe that'll be the time then. Go ahead.
So Brian, can you explain scenario 2 a little better? Excuse me. Donna had asked about whether it would be a separate line item on the taxes. If I'm understanding you right, it would be 0% increase on the taxes across the board, but we would be collecting somehow this $450,000.
Yes, that's correct.
And I guess just to clarify that, I think that's an easy sell as long as we can explain to the ratepayers that this is what this money is, because it's basically, it's downloaded to us by the province as I understand it, and then it's, I mean, it has to get paid somehow.
So I did pull up on the screen just some generic wording that I'm going to have to go back and take a look at. I was kind of hoping it would break them out right away, but it is section 334 under the MGA, and it basically there's a interesting thing that says contents of a tax notice. So it must show like certain things, which would include these mill rates. I kind of got down to subsection 3, and it talks about you have to refer to subsection 326. So I'll take a look at that one after. Also, just to note today that no matter what council decides to do, ultimately the final decision will be made in April. So this is almost like something just in principle. And if council doesn't like the amount at this point, they can always change it.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, if we can't put the RCMP requisition on the tax notice, we always send out an information paper with the tax notice. We could put it in there and say, this is how much it is, but we're not allowed to put it on the tax notice because of the same people who put this charge on us. We can say something like that.
It definitely is very important, and administration has noted this council's direction to be as fiscally prudent as possible to keep the taxes low for residents. And us as administration, we always strive to complete or follow through with it, council's goals and wishes. So this is just another kind of one that shows that administration is being responsible with in following council direction. This is literally just something outside of our control. And ultimately, the tax increase would be less than inflation, and that's adding that requisition on as well.
So you're looking for direction.
So sorry, I have a question. Sorry, this is probably just my inexperience showing, but so you're collecting $450,000 more, and that shows up in our reserves. Does that not have to flow back as a requisition?
Yes. So the
How does it go into our reserves?
So. No, 1 second. So what this would realistically be is we're just talking about the net change to the reserve. So right now, the way that the county has been doing this before was that we were just kind of, the requisition was smaller when it first came on. So all we were doing is just kind of putting it into the municipal tax rate. And then instead of breaking it out like we do with all of our other requisitions. So with the RCMP requisition growing, it's slowly kind of deteriorating the municipal purchasing power that we have as the county. So the RCMP would provide us an invoice, and we would just pay that invoice. They have the powers to do that under some authority, probably in the MGA. So all we're doing is we're just saying, hey, this is not our expenditure, this is a provincial expenditure, so we're collecting the money on their behalf and just remitting it. So ultimately, us increasing the overall revenue by $450,000 is just us breaking up this requisition instead of including it in our own municipal operations.
Okay.
And honestly, it's their money. They should know where their money and what it's paying for.
Yeah.
So the first year was, I think, $220,000, and ultimately at the end of the day, the ratepayers will just receive one bill. They don't receive a bill for education. They don't receive a bill for housing. Waste management is another one they receive for. So what we're trying to do is just break these out because this RCMP one is growing. And it ultimately is going to be around $1 million a year in 2024, maybe 2025. But it is kind of growing, unfortunately, exponentially, far more than any of our other requisitions.
For clarification for me, I know our urban neighbors have a budget issue on just the raises that the RCMP got as well. It sounds like they got almost a cash call on that. Is that Do we get that as well, or is that in this?
So it actually will be included in the RCMP requisition. I was actually talking to the staff sergeant just before he presented at 11. So I think we're still trying to understand what that impact will be. However, we can kind of just evaluate that as that comes forward. So even the firm requisition isn't in, so that's why we kind of have a placeholder of 450,000. So it's just kind of a general idea that potentially the municipal taxation or their overall tax bill will be going up 1.56%.
So if it was a true requisition like other boards have with us, it would be it'd be a line item on the tax bill that we have.
It should be.
And
Yeah.
it may be, I just have to confirm that. And we
That
can
takes it out of our hands, really.
And realistically, this one is out of our hands, and that's what kind of administration is trying to do. Ultimately, we're trying to keep the bill as low as possible, and unfortunately, this requisition just continues growing and growing. It's just getting harder and harder for us to kind of keep this one down.
Go ahead.
I think that's a good idea. But if we can't break it out, I think we can also do with Glenn's suggestion, where a letter comes out saying, "Listen, this is the reason that the bill is different than it was last year. We didn't increase your taxes. They keep downloading on us."
Yeah, we need good communication on this.
Yeah. I think that's the key, Donna. Is either way we need to communicate it well, and then we'll be okay.
Yeah.
So,
I think the letter should go out either way, as it's new. And inform people here tidbits about it. We can put it in the letter and put more detail. Otherwise, it's just RCMP requisition.
yeah.
Well, all of council received the last tax insert. We definitely kind of remodified our tax insert, and that's the notification that comes out with the taxation notice. I think we had something in there last year, and I have to take a look at it again, that broke out, here's the municipal portion, and here is the provincial requisition portion. So we can do that as well. It's kind of like, where are your tax dollars like going to use, or where are they going to use? So that actually would be a very, very good exercise for us to complete again. And we can also kind of find out, we can bring back to the 21st meeting, or December 21st meeting, if we can break that requisition out on the tax bill too.
Okay. So do you want a motion for information?
No, they're looking for a scenario.
Decision.
Oh, you need a scenario decision?
Yeah, so I did put a wording of scenario 2. However, council is at their discretion to pass whatever motion they'd like.
Thanks, Chair. I'll move that council direct administration to proceed with scenario 2 as presented, an increase of 450,000 in provincial requisitions, and bring forward the 2022 to 24 interim operating budget at the December 21st council meeting for approval.
Thank you. Motion on the floor. Discussion about the motion. Call the question. All in favor? Carried.
A comment.
Oh, sorry. Reeve-Link, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
So
I'm in favor.
you're in favor,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Glenn had a question.
Just a comment on the tax notices. If I remember correctly, a couple, 3 years ago, we just got individual tax notices, got a whole bundle of them. Then last year, the year before, we had a summary page, which was a great help. I believe last year that summary page was in a different color. Good thinking. I really appreciated that. It was easy to pull out, and I'm thinking some of our larger landowners would appreciate that too. Otherwise, it'd get lost in a shuffle of paper.
Yes, and just for historical context for new councillors, so back in 2016 we did a software transition from our old accounting system to our new one. Our old accounting system had the capability of combining all tax rolls onto one piece of paper. And then on the transition, one thing that we overlooked, and I think it was 2017, is that we just sent all bills out to one notice for every tax roll, and some agricultural producers have 100 tax rolls. So they had 100 pieces of paper that they had to add up. Definitely an oversight. We did fix that. So what we're going to do again is we're going to include a summary page with all the tax rolls, one number for the person to pay. It's ease for the ratepayer.
Okay. Good on this one. We'll move on to the next one, I guess. 4.3.2 LUV amendments for hens, beekeeping, and mobile homes. That all in one household. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Council. Taylor Felt here with Planning and Development Services Team to present an update on resolutions 2021-09-29 and -12 regarding the land use bylaw amendment process for the backyard hens and beekeeping project and mobile homes. I'll present updates to these resolutions separately, making sure to leave time for discussion and questions in between before moving on. So firstly, the backyard hens and beekeeping project. Following the September 7th council meeting, administration engaged county residents living in our hamlet and residential communities. The engagement included an information sheet that was designed to introduce the potential for allowing backyard hens and beekeeping in these areas. It also featured a survey that was designed to gauge residents' level of support and interest in the project, as well as their perception towards their neighbors keeping hens and bees. The survey was live from October 5th to November 8th, where a total of 95 responses were collected. The information sheet and survey responses can be found attached to this report in Appendix A, which is on page 124, and Appendix B on page 128, respectively. Just scroll down here. Overall, the majority of respondents indicated they did not have an interest in keeping backyard hens on their property, but were also not opposed to their neighbors keeping hens. Similarly, the majority of respondents indicated they had no interest in keeping bees, but that they weren't opposed to their neighbors keeping them either. When we looked into the survey data further, we were able to separate responses by community. This was especially helpful because this information told us that a strong majority of respondents living in Speargrass and the Lakes of Muirfield had no interest in keeping hens or bees, and were also strongly opposed to their neighbor keeping hens or bees. Based on this feedback, administration recommends that the amendments for the hens and bees be considered within the Hamlet Residential District parcels only, and that the land use districts that regulate uses in Speargrass, the Lakes of Muirfield, and Eagle Lake not be considered. Should Council agree with this approach, administration will publish the survey results online and prepare the draft amendments. These will be circulated, giving residents another opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed changes prior to first reading, which is anticipated February 2022. Should Council have an alternate direction, you're of course welcome at this time to share that. Does Council have any questions or concerns regarding the backyard hens or bees in the amendment process before we move on to the next topic?
Is there any questions?
So are you saying that the bylaw would list Speargrass and Muirfield out of this? Yeah. I don't think I'm actually for that. I think they are still residential hamlets. And when you go from some are, some aren't, very hard. I mean, for right now, it's in our heads, but going down the line, I'm gonna hear it. How come they can in Carsland and we can't here when someone decides not to? So I'd say let's do it for all hamlet residential areas. I'd be more prone for that. Plus, I do know someone from Speargrass that just does want bees, so I'm torn with it. So I would say, I would think that maybe you're right, the community of Speargrass probably very rarely are going to have hens, but I don't think that we should have to designate them differently. My opinion.
Go ahead.
So this came up before I was on council. One of the things I did when I was getting ready to run was I tuned into just a random council meeting. It happened to be the one that this was discussed at. And the first two questions that popped into my head is, why would council be, is this the most important thing we have to do? Second of all, it didn't seem to me to be that some of the risks have been adequately addressed. I think I heard at that meeting, but I wasn't there, so please help me but that some people were thinking of using them as service or companion animals as well. I think we need to be very careful. Chickens, having raised many of them and having experienced firsthand Campylobacter bacteria in one of my children, they carry a wide variety of diseases that range from bird flu to salmonella to campylobacter, and I could go on and on. The CDC's posted information about this and the risks of having backyard poultry. I'm just not sure this is something that council should be approving, because I think there's some risks to that by having council approve that. They're fundamentally an agriculture animal.
This has been brought up, and I believe I was probably the one that brought up, because this is something that has been requested through my residents, and it is allowed in other communities, as in Calgary, Chestermere, Langdon, I don't know which ones. Strathmore's looking at this now too. This is, I mean, we don't think it's important, but some of the people that are living in our communities, it's something that they are requesting, so it is important if that's what they're requesting. I can't decide what's important, what we deal with and what we don't, right? This was brought to my attention.
Okay. How many people?
Okay, so probably about 5 on the hens. I just had a realtor phone me and ask me just now if we had approved it yet, because that's one of the things they had asked the realtor. And the bees, very little. The bees were only maybe 2 people. I know that some of them already have them, so there's an issue there too. They were
That's a different issue.
they were listed as you could have hens if you had a companion. If it was listed as a
Yeah, which is strongly not recommended by any health organization.
Yeah. If they're listed as that, that's what the bylaw had said. So I had hens with my kids. We lived outside of Carson, but they have been accepted. I don't think there's anything wrong with hens. It's an education thing. We sent out the education flyers, educating them on hens. There's restrictions on the roosters, restrictions on how many. Like we have restrictions with it. I don't see that being any more problem than me having a swimming pool and someone drowning. I mean, it's up to the caregivers, people that own the land, how they protect their way of living, I guess, whatever. I mean, maybe they do carry diseases, but I've never had that problem. So.
They definitely do, and I know because my daughter got it one year, and she spent several days in hospital. Campylobacter bacteria is a reportable disease. It's nothing to fool around with.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you're an agricultural person that understands the risks of having the hens and you take the proper precautions and stuff. It's a whole different thing if you've got someone that's moved out from the city and doesn't really know how to properly handle livestock. I just think this is a bit risky.
I understand where you're coming from because they're like, you have to have PID. And I know there was a recent outbreak just outside of Calgary in Langdon, I think it was, and there's one south of the river where if you have a PID, they can notify you, and it had to do with hens.
Yeah.
That's just within the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there has been something going around.
Is this something with the amount of hens that you have?
I don't know more information than that. Glenn, go ahead. Sorry.
Just 2 comments. As an agricultural producer, I was to put some hens in my backyard and put a fence around them, and winter coming, it'd probably be reported. You have to care for them too, so we're going to set standards for people that don't know how to care for them. That's one comment. And another one, and it's my lack of paying attention, let's put it down to that way. I got a hamlet in my area that has had horses ever since before I was born. And there's none there now at the present. But I didn't realize when this bylaw was passed that it made keeping horses in that hamlet against the law. And if we can make exceptions for hens in different hamlets, I'm wondering if we can't do something for those horses in that. Because that one parcel probably has about 3 acres attached to it. It's not like these horses were mistreated or anything. One of them was raced them in the Stampede in Calgary. So I forgot about it. If we could look into something like that. There's nobody with them now. And I don't know what the future's going to bring. They sold the property and stuff, but it was an oversight on my part. And I was thinking hamlets, that it did not occur. I thought we were talking the larger centers. I should have clued in that all hamlets are hamlets. So sorry about that.
Gotcha.
So my concern would be the nuisance factor for neighbors, and maybe they don't know when they're answering a survey what might come. And then the ramifications then for enforcement. Would our enforcement services have to go out, and when somebody complains about something, they'd have to go and check it? I don't know. Is there a way of doing this on a temporary 1-year basis and see how it goes and then revisit again? I'd hate to get into something where we already have issues with unsightly properties in our hamlets and villages, and I would hate to make it worse, I guess.
I hope this addresses that perspective. So the next step of this would be, if council wishes, administration proposing some amendments. So what would some of these regulations look like in terms of having roosters, the number of hens on a property, setback requirements that we would then circulate out to the community and ask for their feedback before bringing it to council to make that decision?
So I do want to add to Glenn's comment is that we are an agriculture county. And if we are trying to promote that we are an agriculture county, why can't we bring in hens, bees? I guess bees are agriculture too. And there is guidelines you have that can prevent any of the problems. As a nuisance, hens are no more of a nuisance than a dog barking, and we are complaint driven. So if the complaint comes in with a barking dog, it's dealt with the same way as a complaint would come in for other part of our puzzle. But it is adding value, I think, to people's lifestyles coming out if that's what they're wishing to do.
My question would be in regards to Muirfield in particular. They have a HOA. Would they be able to override this if it went through as a whole thing? Because I know they have certain criteria and things like that I'm sure the HOA, and they would have a lot of complaints about if someone wanted to proceed with this if we made it all the way through. Would they be able to override it, I guess?
Do you want me to take? Yeah, okay, absolutely. So to council, just a couple of notes. With respect to the HOA is bound in terms of Muirfield by architectural controls. They're bound by the provisions in the direct control, but also with therein the land use bylaw. So county's land use bylaw, should we start this amendment process, we'll ultimately have to go through the process, and then we'll get to a point where we get to a point with established guidelines with respect to hens and chickens. So we'll get there. I hope that answers one. Another point, though, is that Muirfield right now is not a hamlet. So Muirfield, it's not the designated hamlet right now. But of course, as Taylor mentioned, we do have the ability to obviously have this discussion, and council can amend the recommendation therein if it so chooses to move forward with this amendment process. There are other best practices that, if council chooses to direct us to start the amendment process, that we can pull from and put into place in terms of going through that, such as guidelines and requirements and the rest. To speak to therapy, we did go through a process a couple of years ago to establish an application process for one to have a therapy chicken and X amount or whatever it was. So we do have that process in place. I don't recall the max of how much the max amount, but we do have that process in place as well. So just to note, the provisions of the land use bylaw are county-wide. And obviously, if one were to ask for an amendment to that bylaw in a specific site, then it gets amended. But obviously, this is something that staff looked into to bring back. So should council choose to direct us to move forward, and obviously the latitude to modify our recommendation, it's up to council, and we will bring back, we'll start the process and have multiple, best practices, bring them into place and move forward with obviously the best fit for our county and starting that process. And as we move through the process, council will be fully apprised, and you can see how that's going, hear from the community, your constituents, and we can work with the process and you to move it forward if council so chooses.
I just have a note. Reeve Lincoln wants to make a comment. She's on the line, so go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Reeve Clausen. Can you hear me?
Hear you very, very well. Thank you.
Perfect. I want to thank administration for their work on this. I think the information that went out to our ratepayers was fulsome. It outlined sort of what is before council. Like Councillor Bigger, there has been increasing interest that I've been hearing about in terms of sort of the urban farming or kind of that concept of keeping hens. I've heard people interested just hoping to be more self-sufficient with particularly given supply chain issues and things like that, and just an overall interest in where food comes from and producing it themselves and those types of things. And then I've also heard from ratepayers who are interested in sustaining bee populations and the impacts of and the contributions that bees make sort of ecologically. So this is something that I was interested in us examining. I completely agree with Councillor Larson that there are certainly some issues, potential issues and concerns. Those were identified in the information that was circulated to ratepayers. The concerns on that sheet, I'm looking at page 124. Concerns listed were odor, noise, coops could be unsightly, illness and disease, and potential to attract rodents, pests, or predators. Those are, of course, concerns that I believe we need to mitigate to the extent that we can. I believe that we could address those through some potential land use bylaw amendments. It may also involve a little bit of capacity being put towards maybe some education and awareness if this is implemented. But I do believe that we can mitigate those issues. I also appreciate the fact that there would be a public hearing if there were land use bylaw amendments proposed and being brought forward. That would give us a further opportunity to hear from ratepayers about concerns and if there are issues that we have not addressed in those proposed amendments. Like all issues that come before us, this is no different. We need to sort of balance that personal autonomy, which of course comes with responsibilities as well, with the impacts on adjacent ratepayers. And at times that is challenging, but this is an issue where I think I'm hearing it prioritized more and more when people are looking where they would like to live and raise their families and work. And I do believe that we can mitigate the issues. So my personal preference, I would support bringing this, having staff proceed through the process outlined on page 125 and through the RFD, bring forward some proposed amendments for consideration. And I don't know that I wouldn't be opposed to further engagement, but I'm also open to conducting the further engagement through the public hearing process. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, as an agriculture producer, I see the survey here and had concerns on it. I don't see anything on there. I'm concerned about the welfare of the chickens and the housing. As if you have any agriculture producer that has chickens, they're in heated barns, right? They're well ventilated. I'm thinking if we only have 5 hens on a parcel, the ventilation won't be a big concern, but the heating will be a bigger concern because there's less animals there to heat the enclosure. And 40 below and 5 chickens standing around in the yard aren't going to survive. And that is a real concern to me.
Go ahead.
And I would agree with that, Glenn, and the chicken coop that you can buy at the PB Mart is not going to be good enough for this, and that's what a lot of people are going to think are going to be good enough for this. And then you know, their legs can freeze, and I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen if they're not cared for properly. And then the other question I had is this not going to open us up to, okay, so now we've allowed chickens, so now Buddy wants a goat, or or some other animal, and I mean, are we just going to keep doing this on and on and on? It's just a question I have.
I think just for council's information, chickens aren't native to here. You look at their legs, they have no feathers on them. Any native bird has feathers down to their feet. And pheasants are not native, and they don't have feathers down to their feet, but they survive most winters.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think that anything the city of Calgary can do, we can probably do. City of Calgary has really looked into this. They allow it. I think we go to the next step. These are people that'll have these chickens. They don't look at it, I don't think, as the same way I look at a chicken. They'll be looking at them as pets. They'll be become part of the family. I mean, you worry about diseases, but if you have cats running rampant, cats can cause serious diseases with pregnant women and all that kind of stuff, and we still allow them. So if we allow cats, I think we have to allow chickens. So I think we go with the next step, and I'm good with that.
Go ahead, Don.
I'd like to move that council direct administration to amend the land use bylaw 2016-01 to allow for hens and beekeeping within residential districts.
Here's a motion on the floor. Further discussion. This is keeping it as presented where
They'll come back.
when we're talking about Speargrass and Muirfield, will be out of this as residential areas, correct? Your mic's not on, sir.
Sorry. That was the recommendation you're making if council chooses.
Okay.
Oh, keeping speargrass out of bees.
Go ahead, Glenn.
Well, it's a bylaw, direct to amend. It'll come with first reading, second reading, public hearing.
That is correct.
Being part of the bylaw, can you put conditions in there? Or does that have to be appendix? I'm talking housing specifically.
So through the Deputy Reeve, great question. What we're going to do obviously is take this direction back, and there's a lot of best practices that we can pull from. We can cite Calgary as an example that may have specific guidelines for this, provisions in the bylaws that they include. We can cite other communities as well. And what we're going to do is look at those best practices and incorporate them into this, into the amendment. You know, we have definition, like a livestock definition, right? So what's included in livestock is certainly these animals, chickens. So, but there are best practices and guidelines with respect to that housing of them, right? So it needs to be orderly, proper. So those are part of the guidelines, and that's what's going to be included in this in terms of moving forward.
Part of your reference organizations, I think a prime one to look at would be the SPCA. They look to another municipality on raising livestock isn't maybe as, I don't want to name names, but still, SPCA probably has or the Department of Agriculture on requirements for housing.
Through the council to Councillor Kester, in regards to your comment about conditions, we were considering possibly making this a discretionary use so that it would go through a development permit to look at some of the regulations on housing. And Mr. Felt can explain some of the best practices that the type of housing that's been allowed in Calgary to prevent the unsightly or some of the issues that were just discussed. But most of it, we were looking at regulations that could be controlled through development permit conditions so that we could look at the type of housing so that they have to submit something as to the location, because we're looking for setbacks as well. They still have to meet the general land use setback requirements. And then we can look at circulate it to neighbors so that they're aware too that it's coming into the neighborhood.
I like the idea of discretionary.
If I can add to that as well, some of the best practices that we've come across and some of the best practices that have led to amendments in other communities have come from the City of Vancouver, actually. And they did involve the SPCA and other animal welfare groups in crafting those amendments around housing standards. So having a certain box size per hen, and they provided a lot of research on these minimum requirements to keep a happy, healthy hen that does produce eggs. There's also amendments or regulations around not having roosters. Seems to be a common theme to have no more than 6 hens. And one of the best practices that I've seen, Rocky View County is doing this, City of Edmonton, City of Vancouver, is that anybody who's interested in keeping hens also has to participate in an online learning session. So they become aware of these best practices and minimum standards to keep a healthy flock in their backyard.
Okay, I'm a little more comfortable with that.
Me too. Thanks.
There's a lot of piles to step in on this one. I have my own, I think we have 50 or 60, and there is concerns of rodents, there is concerns. I've had a weasel in the hen house. Things will come find and try to eat your birds that you have no control over. And I have, after owning them for a couple of years here, residential kind of, I never thought we'd be dealing with this, and I understand we've had people come here, and say they're therapy animals, and I don't know where to stand on this one. I'll stand on the poultry fence. Yeah, I'll support it going forward. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on this, to be honest, but it's going to cost us a fortune in staff time to go through this. There's a motion before us. We'll be switching to by exemption right now because Amber's on the line. It's just easier so everyone remembers how that is. So if anybody wants to vote in opposition, if not, it will carry forward. So if anybody wants to vote in opposition of this.
Kind of.
Seeing none, hearing none, that's carried forward on the first part.
Councillor or Chair Clausen, we have our 1 p.m. in-camera appointment here.
Okay.
So maybe prior to going to that 8277 resolution, we could perhaps go to that in-camera session first.
Sure, we can do that. I'll put a motion forward to go in camera. All in favor? Or by exemption? Seeing none, hearing none, we're going in camera. It's carried.